Okay, so now let's talk about the content. We're going to go into each one of these in a second, so I'm just going to list them off and then go into each one individually. You've got your business glossary, a data system catalog, a report catalog, a data flow catalog and lineage, data requests, reference data, data quality, data ownership and domains, documents, policy attributes, change management, and external data standards and reporting. That's a very broad scope of the types of things that you might be tracking and managing around your data. Now, there's a few other adjacent items that maybe you're like, hey, I didn't see this, we'll touch on, that you could choose to include in data intelligence if you want. We don't include it in our kind of scope, but we'll come back to that. But this is the grand scope. So we're going to jump into each one of these and talk about like what these are and some general kind of best practices information around them. Each one of these are kind of covered in later sessions for this best practices series in much more detail. But the main point of today is just understanding like what this is and like why you might want to have this, track this information around your data, the types of questions people ask that are related to these types of data, like, the sort of purpose and reason for this. And in our next session on building a roadmap, we are very much focusing on this, like understanding the problems you're trying to solve with the use of data within your organization. And from those problems you're trying to solve, deciding like, what parts of a governance framework and what parts of data intelligence content do you want to prioritize to track to help solve those problems, right? These, keeping these things or means to an end, like if your goal is to, improve your self-service reporting within your organization, that might be, have a better report catalog, have a better data system catalog, have good glossary definitions, that might be where you prioritize. If the issue is that you've got, one of the issues is that you have a critical lack of trust in your data and you've got inaccurate and inconsistent reporting, maybe quality is a big focus for you. But each one of these things exists in order to serve an actionable goal or fix an issue within your organization as well. All right, so let's start with glossary. So the types of things that someone might, like why does this exist? We talk about this concept of a functional and technical definitions. The important thing about a glossary to understand is, and some of you might be saying, well, where's the data dictionary in that list? I talked about the business glossary and a data catalog and data models, but I didn't say anything about data dictionary. Well, I don't like the term data dictionary, and I don't like it for like a amusingly ironic reason, is that I feel like data dictionary is an ill-defined term in the sense that if you ask someone about a data dictionary, then some people might be thinking of kind of a business glossary, which is a functional first set of entries where you've got business terms there, where you'd have a functional definition. And some people, though, may be approaching it from thinking of it more as a technical describe of physical or logical data models related to specific data systems, right? In this case, so that's the problem with data dictionary, is that people use those terms interchangeably between those two things, and it's very imprecise. So business glossary is a more precise terminology here. So as I mentioned, you've got both the functional definition, which is the business definition for what something means. It's totally agnostic to the data system. And then we do think it is useful, though, within a business glossary to include what we call technical definitions, which are, 0 to many entries associated with that business glossary for various data systems within your organization that describe technical guidance on how to pull or how that data exists or calculated within each one of the data systems. But it is associated with that glossary entry. So a good, large organization may have several hundred to several thousand business glossary entries. But they might, in terms of data model objects, have hundreds of thousands of them, but the business glossary entries are functional first. So the types of things is something like, hey, I need a report listing customer satisfaction rates for all licensed customers by product and by number of years licensed. So if someone's asking that question, you might get a whole bunch of different answers for what does customer satisfaction means. What is all licensed? What's a licensed customer? How are you defining product? What do you mean by number of years licensed? How is that calculated? So getting a consistent understanding of that business term, regardless of where they're pulling the data from, is incredibly valuable. So referencing that back to the business glossary is incredibly useful. Maybe they're saying like, how do I pull the current mailing address for a prospect from our CRM? So that's looking at a technical detail. So if you've got a business glossary term for current mailing address, it just defines what that is. And then it has a technical definition for, oh, this is where this lives in the CRM. And maybe that's different from where it lives in your data warehouse. So another thing, like the finance team, payroll team, and employee recruiting team cannot agree on what full-time employee means, right? So this is basically using the business glossary to get consensus on definitions. And we have a whole best practices session on business glossary, and one of the things that we talk about there is the power of context and allowing for different definitions that are unique by context. So you could have a, finance full-time employee definition that's different than a recruiting full-time employee definition if they actually truly are different, and so that you force people to have to talk about them separately. The other thing is people say, hey, this report shows a score for at-risk students. What does that mean? How do we calculate it? So this is coming from the perspective of the consumer, right? Somebody who's looking at this report and saying, I don't know what this means. How is this calculated, right? And being able to link out to or reference a glossary so that they can get clear documentation and clarity and transparency on what that term means and how it's calculated and even where it's coming from if necessary. So there's some example of the use of a business glossary. And let's talk about data system catalog. So this is sort of the high-level system details of all the different data systems that you have, an inventory of different data systems, and then the actual physical data model. So this is the other kind of data dictionary term, that tables and columns and everything. And then maybe some supplemental information about that, like tagging PAI or stuff within those items. But the types of things someone says, hey, what data systems do we use that store payroll data? So this is a very general information. Someone's trying to understand where stuff lives, what do you have it within your organization? Or someone saying, hey, I'm new to the finance IT team. Where can I learn all about the finance data systems? So that's again, someone who's new, who's trying to drill in and understand what's in the system. Another one says, hey, I've been asked to write a report out of our CRM. Where can I see and search the data model? Right, so there's another bit of information. So it's just really good place to discover things. Now, a good data model, data intelligence tool will allow you to link between these. So we've had those technical definitions can link back up to the data system catalog, or you can take items in the data model that you think are worthy and kind of promote them up to glossary definitions that link back to that. So there's a bunch of different connectivities. You'll see that with all of this data. It's all can be related and dependent on each other. And right, so the next part I'm going to talk about is what we call a report catalog. This is a little bit new. You might have heard me talk about what I call a data processing catalog. Kind of have to sort of thought about splitting this out into two areas, which I'm going to do in this discussion. But the report catalog is, where you're going to either inventory or curate or even design and build specifications for reports that you have across your organization with different tools against different data systems. So the types of questions people might ask is, say, hey, I'm looking at this report on customer satisfaction and have some questions. So this is a consumer looking at a report who wants to understand, again, back-end transparency. Now, part of that will be looking at what's going on in the report. Part of it might be the glossary elements associated with that. Good report glossary is going to have, right, good report documentation, or specification as we call it, will have glossary definitions associated to it. Another question is, hey, I'm searching for a report that shows age balances by invoice. So this is someone who's trying to go out to an inventory of reports and find a report that may be across multiple reporting tools or maybe just in one. A request came in for a new HR data integration extracts to the data warehouse. We need to agree on the requirements and design. So this is sort of the upfront process of dealing with a new report request and designing out and agreeing on what a report can be. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that. We have a session on the power and return of investment of a well-executed report request process, because that's where a lot of these decisions are made around how people use your data. So capturing that information up front during the creation process is useful. But that information goes in the report catalog as well. And then there may be a report consumer, a report writer who's saying, hey, I have to write a report on the sales pipeline. Is there a similar report I can start with? So looking for other reports to make copies of. Those are just sort of 4 use cases for a report catalog. Now, when I'm calling a data flow catalog and lineage, this is also like a type of data process. So you have data processes that are kind of taking reports take information from one or more data systems to an informational output via, sort of a listing or maybe a chart or graph or other kind of analytical report. And a data flow process like an ETL or an API is going to take information from one or more data systems and move them to another data system. So that's where you get, mappings and lineage information. So types of things people might say is, just saying, how is this data populated? Where is it coming from? What sort of transformations happen? Or someone saying, hey, where is this data sent? It is PII. It needs to be carefully managed. So understanding, the ultimate distribution of the data from a source data system as opposed to where it's coming from. What is the selection criteria determining when a prospect is extracted from our CRM? So this is kind of a detailed question about saying, hey, what's the sort of data scenarios before data gets moved from one system to the next, which maybe is making sure that it matches kind of your system of record understanding as well. And then I mentioned this first, but someone might say, what transformations are happening to the employee status when loaded from the HR system to the data warehouse? Like you can say, this looks a little bit weird over here, and I don't know why. Are we doing any kind of transformations or translations or other kind of calculations as we move the data from one system to another? So that, the process of moving data from one thing to another can be, considered like an ETL process or an API or something. The individual data flows is what you get with lineage. So that data process creates lineage. So this is sort of a mapping of data from two things and maybe get concatenated to another. So that might be, different kind of processes that populate the data. Might be, data movement or data entry or calculations or transformation or filtering can happen during that process. So we have a whole series of things around lineage and ETL, but I find them very much connected, right? So oftentimes you might be documenting an existing process where you get sort of a lineage out of it, like an actual ETL or integration, or you might be documenting sort of a informational mapping. Maybe the vendor provides this for you or something. So it's not as fully detailed, but tells you that it's coming. As you'll see when we talk about ETLs, there are a whole bunch of points around the level of detail. Maybe you're just talking system lineage, or you're talking about table to table or object to object or field to field or even more information around the transformations and things like that. Right, the other kind of thing that you're trying to track around your data is a data request. So that might be requests for new content, maybe support requests, curation requests, issues, etc. So maybe, hey, I need a report listing customer satisfaction rates for all licensed customers by product and by number of years. We've already mentioned that one, right? But that was someone asking that with definitions, but that could start a request. Like they couldn't find one. And that's going to have to get routed to people who are going to build a specification like in your report catalog and maybe end up writing a bunch of business glossary definitions. And then that gets handed off to a report writer, and then that maybe gets validated as something that's accurate, and then updated in your repository. A whole bunch of things. That's what we call emergent content. So if you manage that request process from a customer service standpoint, you'll end up with a bunch of really interesting emergent content, not just a new documented report, but maybe 4 or 5 new glossary definitions and maybe some other valuable things as well. Maybe someone said, hey, I need a change to add a field to the data extract from the HR system and the data warehouse. So this is a request for a change to an ETL process or an integration. I need to request access to a data system. So this is a different type of request. This is someone asking to get access to something, and that may route through to a data owner or an IT person to give them access or to check the rules on that. And that may be handled through your ticketing system or through a tool like Data Cookbook or both. The other thing is someone saying, hey, how long is it taking for us to complete data requests? So this is a question from an oversight person coming in saying, are we managing this stuff well? Are people getting the answers that they need, or the information that they need in a timely fashion? Or the stewards know what they're supposed to be doing, and all that kind of stuff. So requests are incredibly powerful. We'll talk about more about that. All right, reference data. So reference data is a thing that if you manage it well, it's used in a lot of other places. And this is about sort of your code values or lookup values or valid values or status types and things like that. So the types of questions people might ask that require good reference data intelligence is, what are the valid values for an employee status, and what do they mean? list of country codes are different between the CRM and the finance system, and how they map between systems. Or and that's understanding, again, sort of this concept of country codes and how that exists, but both at a kind of global or master level, and then how it might be physically instantiated in different data systems and how they map between the systems. Then lastly, it says, hey, when did the list of prospect stages change? They broke all my sales reports. I always joke that adding or changing reference data, particularly things like statuses and types, is a really good way to break a bunch of reporting. So being able to, kind of have infrastructure for managing, requesting new statuses or changes to statuses and getting those approved is really helpful. In lieu of that, being able to monitor and see when things have been changed so that you can quickly respond before it starts breaking stuff is really helpful. So what we think about, which is a really, I think, useful way to think about reference data, is sort of a functional level and then a technical level. We do that with a lot of our stuff. Glossaries have functional and technical. Reports kind of have functional and technical. Quality rules have functional and technical, we'll talk about. But the concept of a group, so you say, hey, you have this employee status reference data group, that is a master conceptual idea of what an employee status is. So if you are agreeing on that, maybe you have a functional list, these are our employee statuses that we agree are the master list of employee statuses. And then you say, hey, we have two different data systems that store that. We've got the data warehouse that stores an A and an L and an I, and we've got the HR system that stores these values. You can decide, hey, you know what, we don't really need to have just a general functional thing. We can just say that the master list is one of these systems, and that's fine. But the point is, you're going to talk about how they map together, right? Now, so you want to group together the things where you have the same conceptual lists, but maybe they're different between systems, or you want to understand how they live in different data systems. Having a master list in the second and the additional list that map to it. Our data quality is a very big and oftentimes, I don't want to say misunderstood, but kind of you can approach a data quality problem from lots of different ways, and oftentimes people aren't sort of talking beyond each other on this. Some of the use cases here is like someone saying, hey, this report tells me that I have 47 graduate students in my program, and I know I have 52, what's up? So that's a manually reported data quality problem, right? The important thing about that is to understand that that may or may not be an actual problem with the data, right? So this could be what we call a perceived data quality issue. So it is, it might be that there's a problem with the report they're looking at, or that they're looking at a snapshot of the data that's from a month ago, and that's why it's different. It could be that all sorts of things, or it could be that there's an actual problem with the data where you've got students who have missing end dates or something. Regardless of what it is, if it's just a definitional question or a report question or an actual data, like physical data quality problem, it has the same impact, which is the person doesn't trust or won't use, or like their data isn't facilitating them doing data-driven decisions or operational tasks, and that's very disappointing to them. So we really recommend, regardless of what that is, to think about the data quality from an issue standpoint and make sure that you have a way to manage and route and resolve and support people who encounter data quality problems. We'll talk about that in a second. Another example is someone says, hey, we have an issue with customers coming into the data system with no contact email. How many records have this problem? So this is someone who's identified an actual data quality problem in the database, and they want to assess it and understand how big that problem is, and maybe before they clean it up. The next thing is, hey, we fixed all those missing emails, and I want to know when it happens again and see if we can figure out the root cause. So this is someone trying to figure out how to not just fix the data, but repair the root cause of it. And all those things are important issues. So in our data quality process, we'll go through and talk about how this kind of a good data quality initiative best practice, but it really can start with the issues, and that can be manually reported issues that go through a quality resolution process that maybe ends up creating quality rules, like, oh, all employees have to have a primary email address, and then an assessment of those. For a particular data system, we've got 1,000 employees and 50 of them don't have an email address. That assessment could end up, initiating an issue if you want. You can do manual assessments throughout time. But you can also do automated monitoring as well, where you can run these quality rules through sort of technical details to automate assessments and then push that process up. The important thing is that you can decide to confront this problem based on functional issues that you know about or reported about to you, and generate rules, or you can generate rules based on like all of the referential integrity in your data system. It's my opinion that you're going to get better results by starting at it from the business side of this than just going through and saying, hey, let's create data quality rules for all the referential integrity rules in your database, because most of those are going to work fine. And actually, most of those things are not the issues that people are reporting. Most of the data quality problems that people see are caused by business issues or things that maybe aren't caught by the database. So you want to be able to tackle both of those. And if you approach the problem solely from just looking at foreign keys and valid values and data types, you're going to miss this whole world of unsatisfied customers out here who aren't seeing your data as working well. But the next thing is kind of ownership and data domains and both from accountability and support standpoint. So you might have someone say, hey, I have a question on how we determine prospect ratings. Who decides that logic? So this is basically saying who's the subject matter expert, or who's the decision maker on this business glossary term or this reference data term or this calculation. Another one is someone reported an issue with a number of graduate students showing up on a Tableau enrollment report from the census data warehouse. Who should look at this? All right, so this is an interesting question. So we had in the previous example someone saying I got the wrong number of students, and this is an example saying, hey, I'm seeing this on a Tableau report that's being run out of this particular data warehouse. So there may be two owners there, like whoever is sort of the owner or the right person to look at the report, and also maybe who is the right person to look at the data warehouse data, or maybe it's both. So understanding how to route things to the appropriate person for that. Then another thing is like, should this data be classified as private? Who do I ask? So maybe there's someone who is, has oversight around the policy or certain types of content or security classifications, things like that. So really this breaks down to routing by what we call functional areas as a data domain, or data system as a data domain, or tool as data domains. So, like, people who are looking at Tableau, or people who are looking at enrollment, or people looking at data warehouse, or people who are looking at policies. And you may, collapse that into a couple simplified roles, or you can expand it. The other thing we really recommend is from that kind of data governance oversight is that it's not required that you have to have roles for every particular possible combination of things. If you don't have something that just gets routed to some sort of general triage oversight group, you can go find that expert to help them. All right, the next thing is documents. So you might have, hey, we need a policy for data retention. So someone who's like written up a document around data retention policy. Or do we have a place where we have documented the process for purchasing a new data system? So a business process document. Or someone said, hey, based on the state guidelines, we need to change the policy for storing private data. So this is basically updates to them. So if you have sort of policy documents or business process documents that you want to have versioned and shared a document, that's another thing you can do. We talk about this concept of policy attributes, which is slightly different. Like once you've developed your policy of this is what our privacy policy is, then you need to know, like, what does it apply to? So in this case, someone says, hey, our data retention policy says we cannot store any PCI compliant data for more than 1 year. What data does that apply to? Somewhere you're going to go through and say, hey, these business glossary terms, these data systems, these data model objects, these reports have PCI data in it. Which data elements or tables in this data system contain PII? Is job title considered personally identified information? So this is assigning these policy attributes, if you develop them associated policies, to various other contents in your system. The next thing is change management. So all of the information that you have around your data is going to be in flux and evolve over time. So it might be HR data extracted the data warehouse change, we need to update the documentation, right? Or there's a proposed change that lists the valid values associated with gender. We need review and approval, update the reference data list, and identify the reports and other items impacted by this change. So you've got a version change to some sort of thing around your reference data, but you see that has impact, that needs to get sort of approved, and then that has impact on reports that use it, or glossary terms that use it, or data quality rules that use it. So managing that change and versioning. The data system just had a major data model update. We need to know what has changed. So seeing basically updating the documentation on your data system and all the data systems, and also identifying what's changed and what impact there might be from that. So those are all critical elements to things. So pretty much everything in your data catalog and data intelligence contents needs to be able to be versioned and have impact analysis. Lastly, you have sort of external data. So there's some things that you're tracking and you have your own definitions of things, what they mean, but some is outside of your control. So that might be like, hey, the federal government just changed the definition of a part-time employee. Or what are the details of the benchmarking data file that we send to the consortium for the annual benchmark report? Is it the same as last year? So you've got some set of data that you submit to some consortium that has definitions and specifications for that data and report. Someone said, hey, there must be another client using the same software that has built a report like this before. So you're looking for external data standards or examples or stuff and tracking when those things have changed and what agencies and stuff that those terms are related to. All right, so there you go. That's the run through for all this content.